It's the day after we filled up our coolant system on this 280 SL, and I can see that there is a puddle of coolant under the car on this side. So let's have a look and see if we can figure out where that's coming from. That leak is coming from this pipe here, which has no hose clamp on it. So I think all we need to do is put a hose clamp on that, and that should sort that issue out. That should do it. We've got a 12 to 22 mil hose clamp on there. And what we'll do is we will just wrap a piece of kitchen roll around that overnight and just see if it's dry in the morning. While I'm here, I can see a few other hose clamps missing. There should be hose clamps on this pipe, but this pipe is starting to crack, so we've ordered another one from Mercedes, and that's coming from Germany. One of the things we need to address before we get this car running is this pipe here. Now there should be a section of pipe going from the air intake to the brake booster here, and there should be this one-way valve on there which is snapped off in there. These valves are still available. They're about £20 from Mercedes, and you can get a reproduction from the SL shop for about £7. So what we're going to do in the first instance is just take one off our parts car. So this here is our 450 SL parts car. It's a 1974, 75, can't remember which, and it does have one of those valves on it. And we're going to just try and detach this here. It's important to use two spanners when you undo this, one for the top fitting, one for the bottom fitting. Whether that top fitting is rusted solid and will come off is of course another matter. Surprisingly, that fitting didn't want to come undone, so we just cut it off. This hard plastic pipe here will never come off by pulling it. What you need to do is just cut it gently along these lines here, and then it'll separate. A small cut there, this will just come out. If you live in the States, you can get that pipe from Authentic Classics for just $14.20. In England, the same pipe will cost you £28 plus delivery from the SL shop. I can't bring myself to pay that, so we're just going to use some silicone hose that we use for brake bleeding as a temporary alternative. You just need to cut a length of this pipe. So this pipe is just slightly smaller than the diameter of this pipe, so we're just going to put a little bit of silicone spray on the end of the fitting. It allows us to slide that on. There we go. That's not perfect, but we now have a functioning hose. Now that we've got that pipe to the brake booster sorted, the last pipe, I think the last pipe we've got to sort out is this. This is what's on the car, and they're trying to ram it into that hole there via this plastic fitting. Now this plastic fitting is probably the original fitting off the broken plastic pipe, but that's never going to fit. So what we are going to do is use a Mercedes elbow, part number 127-029-0791, and that is going to perfectly fit this end inside like so. Go in there, and then we're going to cut off a piece of copper pipe, and that copper pipe is going to perfectly fit in there. But what we need to do is just cut this pipe to length. It's way too long at the moment. That pipe to length using an angle grinder. You can just use a hacksaw or a sharp blade, but it's sometimes easier to get a clean cut using an angle grinder with a thin metal cutting disc. Setup now, not completely OEM, but you'd have to look quite close to spot the difference. End of the pipe now just slots in there perfectly, like so. And that looks tickety-boo. There's no more leaks from here, so we can take that off. Having fixed the coolant leak and attached the various hoses, we're now going to check whether this car's actually getting spark, and there's two ways of doing it. The first and easiest way is just to get a drill bit that fits down that hole there and put it a millimetre away from here and crank the engine to see if there's a spark. If you see a spark, it obviously means there's spark getting to this plug here. The other thing you can do is actually take a spark plug lead off and then unscrew the spark plug. The only thing I would caution against is if a car's been sitting for a while, like this one, you're going to have lots of dirt, grime, paint flakes, etc. sitting down these channels here, and you do not want to take a spark plug out only for that to fall into the engine. If you are going to go down that route, take out the end spark plug here because it's much easier to clean around. This car is turning over at the moment. We verified this spark. The next thing we're going to do is check that there's actually fuel getting to the injector fuel rails. On this 1975 280SL D Jetronic, this pipe here is the fuel inlet pipes, and I verified by taking that fitting off that when the fuel pump is running, fuel is being pumped to this point here. Now this pipe here leads up to the cold start injector. What I've ascertained is that this here this is a D Jetronic car, is the cold start injector. And when we take a voltmeter from the negative terminal of the battery and hold it on to the right hand side of this cold start injector plug here, we are getting 12 volts when we crank the car. However, if I take this out now, crank the car, we should see fuel spraying out of there, but we're not. There's nothing coming out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just disconnect this pipe here. It's got the wrong hose clamp on anyway. If you use that style of hose clamp, same at the bottom there, you're liable to cut into the pipe. And we're going to take that hose and see if a load of fuel comes pouring out. When I twist this off, hopefully without breaking the fuel injector, we will see whether there's actually any fuel in there or not. Well, there's our problem. We got no fuel. I'm going to try something that's a bit dangerous. I'm going to try cranking the car without the injector on the end of it, just on the very slim chance that there is fuel going down the lines, but not at sufficient pressure to get past the actual injector. So just to make things slightly less dangerous, I've clamped a clear pipe inside that fuel pipe there, put a load of tissue down. What we don't want is just fuel shooting over the distributor or anything like that. The other end of this pipe is just going into a little bottle, so let's just try cranking that, seeing what happens. Wow, so that's really interesting. We do have fuel going down that tube there, and I suspect the problem is that it's not at sufficiently high pressure to actually get past the injector. It could of course be that the injector itself is not working, but we can probably test that externally. Now it's a little bit dangerous doing this, but I'm going to crank the engine and see if fuel sprays out into this tissue here. I suspect that it won't, and that will tell us it's locked. Now, if there's air in the fuel line, the problem could be something as simple as we just need to crank the engine for longer. In the first instance, I'm going to take the lead off the distributor so we're not getting any sparks, and then I'm going to crank the engine again and see if, but for longer, to see if we get any fuel coming out, because it might just take a while for the air to clear out. Okay, so there we have it. It was just a matter of air in that line. So I'm going to reattach this now, and I bet this car will attempt to fire up when I reattach that injector. If you are ever doing this yourself, you just need to remember that there is a washer, it's probably a spring washer, it's difficult to tell when they get to that age, on the nuts or the screws, and also a gasket between the injector and the engine block. So let's see now what happens if we turn this car over. Does it attempt to fire up? Okay, let's see what happens if we crank the car and touch the accelerator. We have a spring missing that goes from here to here, which means that when you put your foot on the accelerator, that does not spring back. Now, there's only one place that I found that actually sells that spring, which is SLS in Germany. So I've ordered one, which they're going to send to me. I don't have a fuel pressure gauge, but even without one, using sections of clear hose and interfacing them in, I've ascertained that there's not enough fuel pressure pumping that fuel down the line. I have a spare pump here. This is from a Datsun ZX, 280ZX or something like that. It's exactly the same pump. I've never tried it before, so what I'm doing is I'm just hooking that up to a canister of fuel here and seeing if that pumps, and we've got a switch here. So let's give that a go and see if we can do that without killing ourselves and without electrocuting ourselves. Okay, I can see that that is pumping, which is good. We swapped the two fuel pumps over. That's the new one that we got off eBay, or the second-hand one. That's the one we took off the car. Next up, I've bridged the fuel pump relay. So this is the fuel pump relay here. They're available just for a few pounds from Euro Car Parts. And we've put a piece of wire from pin 30 to 87. And what that means is when we turn the key, the fuel pump will run continuously as opposed to just a few seconds. And that's just to get some fuel down the lines and pressurize the system, hopefully. I'll just hook the battery back up. It's always a good idea to undo the battery when you're doing anything on the fuel pump, just in case you make a spark. I'll just put some tissue under some of these fittings here that we undid just while we were testing things yesterday, just to make sure there's no leaks. When I turn the key in the ignition, the fuel pump should run consistently. It's much quieter than the other fuel pump. So let's see what happens if we try cranking the car. Okay. Next up, we'll just put the fuel pump relay back in, up there. Let's see if this car still starts with the fuel pump relay in. The fuel pump relay should come on for a second and then switch off, which it does. I can hear it click. We are slowly but surely getting there. The car's now running for a fraction of a second, and what we need to ascertain is that car running for a fraction of a second because the cold start injector is squirting a bit of fuel in. When that fuel is used up, the engine is dying, because this cold start injector here is not linked to the ECU in any way. It's independent of that. So if our ECU is knackered or not working properly, the car will do exactly what it's doing now. I'm going to leave this video here until we get that spring from Germany and also a decent fuel pressure gauge, because these D Jetronic systems are particularly sensitive to fuel pressure. The fuel pressure needs to be constant at about 2 bar and stay at 2 bar regardless of the load on the engine. So we may need to start taking out these fuel injectors here and just testing them to make sure they're not leaking, and also possibly taking out the ECU and testing it, because it is the ECU that controls when those fuel injectors fire. In the next video, I'm going to start putting the interior of this car back together, starting with the glove box here, because I discovered a company in Germany that remanufactures glove boxes for the SL for left-hand drive cars. And the problem that we've got is that the parts cars are right-hand drive and the two are not interchangeable. If you look at the glove box that came with this car, it's absolutely knackered. So in the next video, I'm going to be showing you how to remove and install a glove box in an SL. It's not quite as easy as it looks. We're going to be making up an ECU bracket so that ECU is not hanging down there. Then we'll be putting the chair back in for the first time in about a year, and the central console, and getting this car looking a little bit more like a beautiful SL. And when we've done all of that, we'll be tightening up some of these exhaust manifold bolts and seeing if we can't get this car running properly and sounding a little bit less like a tractor.